Hey, welcome. I'm Krista O'Reilly-Davidegui, and I work as a writer, holistic mind-body coach, and joyful living educator with midlife women. Very happy to be here with you. We are recording live in the sensitive empowerment community, and it is a welcoming space for sensitive souls like myself. You can learn more and join us at sensitivecommunity.com. Today's topic is thriving through and beyond grief as an HSP. It is a big topic, and in a limited amount of time, I've decided to hone in or narrow my focus on or down to grief arising from loss of a loved one. You can add questions in the chat or save them for the end. Once we end the recording, we will have a chance to connect and share experiences or ask questions. And if you are listening to the recording, I'll make sure that I'm popping in several times over the next few weeks and just watching for your questions or comments as well. So to begin, this feels important to me to say that although I offer my work from a grief and trauma-informed perspective, I'm mostly coming here to join you as a mother and a human with experience of grief or my own relationship with grief. And that it feels really important to me because theory is one thing and it can be useful, and lived experience is a whole other ball game. So my parents died fairly young, 10 and 20 years ago. I've lost many other close family members. And this month, 4 years ago, my highly sensitive son died by suicide at 23 years old. So my relationship with grief and my understanding and experience of grief and trauma and how to not only survive, but continue living fully and even thriving forward has radically changed over the past 4 years. We live in a largely grief illiterate and grief phobic world, which is really odd considering, grief is like the number or the only thing that we know for sure is certainty in our life. But it's something that we avoid. We avoid talking about it. It's uncomfortable. We also live in a very kind of disembodied culture. And that can often mean that we're very out of touch with physical sensations and our emotional experience, and often afraid of what's happening in our bodies. What do I want to say? I lost my train of thought. I'll just jump ahead. So I believe that grief is sacred. And the work of grief is incredibly important. We can't bypass it. And if we try to do so, the work will be prolonged. If we don't do the work or allow grief to do its work in us, we're kind of keeping a lot of emotion and memory stored in the body or stuck in the body, and it will find a way to be heard one way or another. Two things just generally relevant to a conversation around grief that I have needed to know and that I think can help other highly sensitive humans do this work. One, it really is this hard. Now, every experience of grief is different, and I have no desire to speak over your experience. So my experience of loss with my parents was really difficult and had, just was nothing like the death and trying to live again after the loss of my child. So, all of our experiences are different and valid. But something I've really needed to hear and have affirmed is it really is this hard. And you're not doing it wrong. If it's so, so, so hard, even though other people want you to get over it or be better, it really can be this hard. And hard doesn't mean bad or wrong. And that is something that is another kind of societal message that we get. Like if something's messy, if something is painful, it must be wrong. And the reality is being human in a messy world involves pain. It involves stretching and struggle and growth. And a lot of that comes through discomfort. And the second thing that I wish I had known is that early grief lasts 2 to 3 years. So acute grief are those first weeks and months following the loss. But early grief can last up to 2 years. And if there's trauma involved, as with suicide loss, it is very normal that those first 3 years of loss are still early grief. Again, it just, we need to know this because the world will tell us otherwise. It took me 3 years to climb up out of survival into thriving again. And that doesn't mean that the thriving again feels easy. After that, though, that first 2 to 3 years, we enter the season of mature grief. All right, so having said that, I would like to share some truths and practices to help you as a highly sensitive human bring compassion to your grief experience, find a felt sense of safety in the storm, and thrive forward through and beyond deep grief. So move at the speed of safety. It's an expression that I learned from one of my instructors. We get to heal at the speed of safety or move at the speed of safety. And in my work, I often repeat, like over and over and over, safety first. The reason is that we cannot grow, heal, or learn if our nervous system doesn't feel safe. So we have to, and after grief and traumatic loss, life feels chaotic or unmoored, uncertain, and we have usually or often lost that felt sense of safety. So we do need to figure out how to restore that. One of the primary ways that we create safety for ourselves is through compassion. No amount of bullying, judging, shaming, criticizing can help you move faster through your experience. So if you take away nothing else from this, I would hope that you walk away remembering that self-compassion is one of the kindest and wisest things you can offer yourself ever. And not only in grief, but ever. Sometimes though, and I'm going to speak to this a little bit more later, we can't do this alone, and we need an empathetic witness. We need other people or even one other person to just be a witness with us and for us in our grief. Resisting grief, not only resisting grief, but resisting pain, resisting the reality of our lives, while very normal, and there is zero shame or judgment in this at all. But it's important enough that I want to mention it. Resistance can make things worse or prolong the pain. And this is a tricky thing. And we're also going to talk about paradox a little bit later. There is a very natural grappling and wrestling that can come up when we have lost somebody that we love and our world has changed. And again, you can't rush that. And there is no judgment. And you don't have to try to make yourself get to a place of surrender or acceptance. But often what happens very naturally and messily and with lots of heartache and hard work is that we do this work and we get to a place of greater peace or acceptance. Use the language that serves you in this season of life as we just kind of come face to face with the new reality of our lives. And I'm going to talk about this in just a moment. As an HSP, we tend to feel things really intensely. And a lot of us will have, this is going to vary according to the type of loss you are navigating. But, maybe you think back about your previous experiences, or if you're in it right now, you can bring compassion to your experience if you're noticing something like this. As HSPs, because we feel things so intensely, and that can be emotions, and that can also be physical sensations, we might have experiences of panic, being flooded with anxiety, other physical sensations like going numb or cold or pressure in the chest, whatever that is for you, and it can feel really scary. So what happens is often our brain tells us there's danger. Maybe we're feeling these physical sensations and emotions, and our brain interprets that as danger. And we become fearful of that experience in our bodies. And that kind of fear loop can almost keep us stuck. So learning how to find safety, even in the panic, even in the intense discomfort, even in the anxiety, will be one thing that can help you as you go. And I don't have time to talk about the how of that, but I'll plant that seed, and then that's something that you can investigate or explore for yourself. So we need a lot of rest and spaciousness to heal and grieve. You know that as an HSP, you need that anyway. And you're going to need that way more if you are navigating grief. A little side note, I guess, for some of us, when we have experiences of grief, some people need to quit work or take time off. And for others of us, that's actually dangerous. We need something where our focus is directed and it serves like an anchor in the storm. And after my son died, my work was one of those hopeful things that kept me above water. I could barely do any at first. And I think the first year, I maybe did 5 hours a week. Second year, maybe 15 hours a week. But it's nonetheless served as an anchor in the storm. And if that's true for you, you take care of you and just notice where you might tend towards overwork as an avoidance tactic. So I want to come back to this sort of how we feel things so deeply. And there are a few things I want to say here. One, you may have heard this, depending on what else you've listened to in this community, you may have listened to some other people talk about the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. Our nervous system's job is to keep us safe and alive. That's it. Some of the ways it learns to do that are maladaptive. Some of them keep us alive in crises, and then we have to learn new patterns once we're out of crises. But your nervous system job will keep you safe and alive, and if you're here, it has done its job. And there are a few threads here that I want to mention. So I talked about that intensity that HSPs experience. And one misconception is that if we are an empathic person, a gut-led, intuitive person, or even kind of a body-centered person, the belief is that we're really good at this. And interestingly, what I have discovered for myself and through years of work as well is that as HSPs, because of that intensity, most of us aren't necessarily aware of how much we've developed patterns of dissociation or of numbing, or in some cases, healthy soothing, but things to help decrease the intensity of these physical and emotional experiences. So, and again, there's nothing bad or wrong with this. Sometimes it is too much. And it's not even safe to try to feel all the things at once. So, as an HSP, if you are navigating grief, I would invite you to compassionately bring awareness to what is happening in your body. What are the emotions that are dominant? And just keep in mind that there are surface emotions like anger and rage, and often underneath them lie other emotions. And these are valid, and these are valid. They're all valid, but often anger could come up, and anger is easier and more accessible than the deep pain of loss. Or self-blame. Your child dies, your spouse dies, your baby dies, and we can tip into self-blame and self-judgment, because that is, as painful as that is, sometimes it's easier to access or more safe than going into the reality of life without that person. So you may notice things that not everybody notices, and people don't really talk about this. Like, even though I work in these circles, anywhere outside of sort of my educational spaces, people aren't aware of these things. So my body tends to act like a canary in the coal mine and a walking textbook, a walking trauma textbook. I didn't know these things, and I needed to know them way earlier than I did. But so I mentioned you might notice sensations like numbness or coldness. Your body may tip more easily into panic and flood anxiety than some people. You may notice after stress or deep grief, profound grief, and traumatic grief that your body starts shaking. It can feel really scary. Sometimes it might shake violently almost, and you might just need somebody to come and be with you or gently wrap their arms around you, not to stop the shaking, just to be with you in that experience. But I even experienced years after a massage where I feel very safe, my body started shaking after. And because I was in a safe environment, I could just, let my therapist know I have some space on my own and allow my body to do the work that it needed to do. And often that is a way that our body naturally discharges stress and trauma. But there are other ways that if you are navigating grief that kind of turns your life upside down, you may tip back into old patterns of, drinking and disordered eating or perfectionism as a way to try to create order or safety in your world. And if you notice these patterns, you can reach out for support and be honest about them. But again, remove the shame and judgment, because my perspective is that you need to do what it takes to stay alive and stay above water, especially in those earliest stages. So that leads me into another point that you may or may not have considered as an HSP. Hopefully you've heard that, our mind, emotions, body, it's all connected. There's this bi-directional pathway. The state of our body impacts our moods and ability to focus and think clearly. And our mental state also impacts our physical experience. So what I have found is that somatic work, so somatic grief work, somatic trauma therapies are really effective for highly sensitive souls. There are other wonderful evidence-based therapies that are more cognitive, but memory and energy and emotion is stored in the body. And remember, I touched on how we can have some really sneaky and strong self-protective mechanisms that we're not even conscious of a lot of the time. And what can happen is we go into talk therapy, say, or, when we start storytelling and we disconnect from our body. As we do that, and I won't say more about that, except I just want to point you towards the idea that somatic therapies can be very effective in supporting us through hard life experiences. So things like EMDR, somatic experiencing, brain spotting, sensory motor psychotherapy, etc. I've done lots of different things, and all of them have brought in, supported me in different ways. Also, you may notice that your body naturally begins to rock or stim. I mentioned shaking. You may groan or sigh. And in the early months and years, depending again on the type of loss, there may also be this deep wail or rage that needs to be expressed. It's so uncomfortable, so vulnerable, and there may not be many spaces where you feel safe to give that a voice. But I do encourage you to recognize that these are very healthy ways that your body is trying to bring you back into a place of healing and stability and safety. Even years later, grief may arise loud, unexpectedly, and you may notice that there's this sort of groan or sigh. And again, these are incredibly beautiful and wise ways that our body knows to take care of us. So all of that was sort of about the idea of bringing safety, kind of restoring felt sense of safety through compassion. And I want to chat now about community. And so we can't do this alone, and we need safe and brave community, but we also need to be really wise about whose voice we're listening to and who we're allowing into our inner circle and our spaces. This includes professional people or people in professional roles and grief circles. It also includes friends and family and faith communities. Not everybody is trauma and grief informed. Most people are not, right? And there's a rising movement in the professional world where, things are improving and access to grief informed care is improving. But you do need to be wise, because there is a lot of harm being perpetuated, a lot of harmful beliefs, harmful practices that can end up shaming and isolating people who are already hurting. So if for instance, you want, because I do believe community matters, we need each other. And I'm a strong introvert as well. So when I say this, it doesn't come easily to me. My instinct is is always withdraw. And I've had to learn to move against that instinct to make a bid for connection, whether that's a quick text to somebody, a good friend or a sibling, and just say, I'm not okay right now. I am in pain. Doesn't mean I want to talk about it. It means I'm making this bid for connection, just remembering that there's a thread connecting me to other people who love me, and I am not alone in the world. I needed a grief circle, but only a circle very specific to my type of loss. I'm not a group person necessarily, and so I'm really careful about like where I am willing to engage. So, I'm here because this is feels like a safe, welcoming, beautiful community. So I needed a suicide loss specific space, because that is an entirely different experience from other forms of loss. So just keep that in mind, like there is a place for all sorts of groups and all sorts of counseling spaces and communities, but just know that it doesn't mean they're all right for you. And it might feel really challenging for a while to find the spaces that are right for you. And I encourage you to not give up, to persist, because it matters that much. As a highly sensitive human, there's a good chance that you would do better in an online space, online grief circle, online EMDR, more than going in person. I mean, that may not be accurate for you, but I find that is common for those of us who are highly sensitive. So a few other things that I want to touch on around the idea of community matters. Not every relationship survives grief. So grief and trauma can be a catalyst for tremendous growth and pruning in our lives. Sometimes it just removes our ability to deal with unhealthy things that we've tolerated in the past. And it's just like, okay, we're done. And you release those relationships that maybe needed to be released years before. Some people will leave, and you may find new, beautiful relationships. If you are grieving, you don't need to be fixed. You need to be witnessed. And many people in the world, will stop you at the grocery store or wherever and say really obnoxious things to you. And it's usually for one of two reasons. One, nobody has modeled to them a healthier way of witnessing people in their pain. And two, it's to alleviate their own discomfort. So when people offer kind of spiritual pat answers, or they tell you they're in a better place or blah, 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 often that's for them. They feel uncomfortable and they want to feel better. So they come up with an answer. As a mom who buried a child after a death by suicide, I heard all sorts of horrific things, and it was really painful. And now I'm in a place where I can, there's more space between me and them, and I can see, in 99.9% of the cases, people are not trying to harm. But that doesn't mean they aren't harming. And so this is a conversation that needs to kind of be ongoing, and we need to be practicing together and learning together and modeling new ways of being with and for each other. As an HSP, your body and home are your safe spaces. Again, I never want to speak over you or your experience. So this, maybe it isn't true for you. You are the expert on your own body and life. But think about that. For many of us as HSPs, our physical kind of bubble and our home are our safe spaces. And we have every right to say no, to have strong boundaries, even inflexible boundaries in those early years. We have a right to put our own needs first, even when it makes other people angry with us. So not everybody gets to come to the funeral or memorial. Not everybody gets to hug you because they want to without consent. People don't get to just show up at your door and expect a conversation because that's what they want. You get to be the guard and protector of those safe spaces for yourself. I would even be cautious, or at the very least, just awake to the impact of anybody entering those spaces if you are navigating trauma or profound grief. So, a plumber coming in and chatting to you or whatever, the energy that people bring into your home can actually be very activating to your nervous system. So, just being aware of that might be helpful for you. Or maybe, as you love somebody else, navigating their own grief experience. And finally, in this area here, I just want to say that family and friends who love you may not be the best people to hold space for you, depending on the loss and depending on the duration of sort of the hardest part of your grief journey. They may not know the language. They may not know how to do the work. And when we are really hurting, especially the people really closest to us, like our partner, it can be really scary for them if we're honest about the depth of our pain. So we need other safe places, so a therapist, a grief circle, places that are there for that purpose as a container for truth telling. And then you can come back into those other relationships and, and keep moving forward together. But again, this is something that people may assume that, well, if they love me, they should be here for me, but it doesn't mean they can be, right? We all grieve differently. So in my home, after the loss of my son, my youngest daughter and I are highly sensitive humans, and then my older daughter and my husband are not. The ways that we experience grief in our bodies is completely different. The ways that we heal and find our way forward are very different. And all of it is allowed. Nobody's doing it wrong. Alrighty, so I'm going to move into the third kind of, is it true? Is it the third? Yeah, it's the last part of, what I really wanted to share with you. And it's around thriving forward. That's something that I kind of made up myself. And I've come across some people talking about grief in an empowering way. But for years and years and years, I hadn't found it anyway. So I didn't even know that it was possible. I didn't have that language, and it's been so helpful for me that I do want to share it with you. One of the key ways that I know to thrive forward through and beyond grief is by embracing paradox. So embracing paradox means to be able to hold two seemingly impossible or contradictory truths at once. I also call it a practice of both and. So, for instance, a brave and beautiful life includes joy and pain. I can be strong and resilient and also be hurting really badly or grieving. One doesn't cancel the other out. And again, this is one of the most powerful, impactful practices that I know, that I have lived, and that I offer other people. we love binaries and boxes because they make us feel safer. They lower uncertainty. They're neat and tidy. But real life and human beauty and diversity doesn't fit neat and tidy into binaries and boxes. And your grief does not need to fit neat and tidy into anyone else's little box. It can be both and. So something I've noticed, years out, again, this month is 4 years since my son left the world. If I express, my excitement about a creative project I'm working on, or, something positive, many people automatically assume, oh, she's all better, as though grief is all or nothing. And of course, that isn't true. Or if I express pain or despair, some people interpret, and that means she's all despair, she's only hurting, And it's like, no, these realities live simultaneously in our bodies and our lives. And it's one of the things even that you can practice somatically is noticing, like, when the pain feels so big, when it feels like your whole body is pain, you might notice, listen inward or look and say, oh, but I notice that my hands are okay. My hands don't feel in pain. You might notice that actually I thought it was my whole body. And then I realized really it's only like my upper, my abdomen, part of my body. And that may sound silly to some people, but what you're doing is reminding your brain of the truth of both and. It's not all or nothing, either or. We have permission to feel all the feelings, all the emotions. None of them are bad. Rage and anger are not bad. They are just as healthy as hope and delight. Emotions aren't good or bad. They are simply messengers, information. And again, in this world that loves neat and tidy, there's a lot of pressure to be happy all the time or only express what people consider positive emotions. But my rage needs a voice. It deserves a voice, and I can't heal without giving it a voice. It doesn't mean I go hurt people or weaponize it. But again, it's not one or the other. Rage itself is an expression of our experience, and it needs to be released from our bodies. So all the emotions deserve a voice. I do want to set a side note. Grief tends to bring to the surface old wounds. Anything that has been unhealed in you from the past or some things from the past will surface as you in your grief. It's interesting how this happens. So that would be something that it might seem like random. And what I have found is we don't have to go looking for things. If it needs to be addressed, it'll rise to the surface, and then you can decide what now, So you might take that into EMDR. You might take that into your grief work or whatever. Okay. And so then I want to talk about joy and happiness and well-being. Because if you've gone through the loss of a loved one, you've probably grappled with this. Am I allowed to feel joy when my loved one is gone? Am I wrong for wanting to thrive when they suffered? The answer is yes, you are allowed. Their story has come to an end and yours has not. And it's hard. And you are allowed to thrive and to live fully. Joy is it's a common human emotion, and it is considered the most vulnerable human emotion. because it is so vulnerable, we tend to avoid it, armor up against it. And if after you lose a loved one, if you even have like this little flutter of happiness or well-being or joy or whatever, you might notice that you get activated. In my case, and I was very, I already knew this, I'd been practicing, but after my son died, I was determined to not shut down joy. And so, but the moment I acknowledged it, my whole body would go into panic and dissociation. And I kept practicing because I wanted to rebuild felt sense of safety in joy as much as felt sense of safety in rage. So in case you don't know that, though, I would like you to walk away knowing that you might find that allowing positive experiences after your loved one dies is really activating in your nervous system. And that's normal and it's okay. Be gentle with yourself, bring compassion to your experience, but try not to shut down the joy or the well-being. Okay, finally, one thing that I want to offer. This is probably a good, helpful thing for any person. But as an HSP, for sure, I suspect this will help you, as it has for me. And that is to create and maintain simple, portable rhythms or routines that serve as anchors in the storm. So ideally, we start building some of these into our lives, pre-crises, but you can start wherever you are. If you're going through significant loss, you might forget how to eat or shower, and you're going to have to start rebuilding from there, the most basic of habits. But I have certainly found that a simple morning and evening routine, even if that's all I can hang on to, they create a sense of stability and groundedness as the rest of my life feels out of my control. So walking partners, like movement, is really good for releasing stress and pain and processing. So you might want to find walking partners and build it into your calendar. So your brain, you don't have to think about it. Like, you may not feel like going out ever, but it's built into the calendar. Somebody will be with you. There's a fixed container. So for instance, I would walk a particular nature trail. It's 50 minutes start to finish. So there's this like clear container. Somebody was walking with me. And we would get out in any weather 3 times a week. And sometimes I couldn't make it because I couldn't stop bawling or whatever. But those anchoring routines, rhythms and routines, were incredibly important to my healing. So just think about these little ways that you can put things on rinse and repeat. You don't have to have brain bandwidth on any given day. They're just built in to your calendar, and they're little things that just help keep you steady. All right, I'm going to end there. I may have missed so much. Huge conversation, as I already said. But thank you for being here with me. If you would like to join this community, you can do so at sensitivecommunity.com. And to learn more about my work, I invite you to connect with me at alifeinprogress.ca. All right, thank you.